So welcome to the second Open 2020 webinar. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to hear about Digital Life Collective. And Open 2020 is basically the replacement for what would have been the physical conference in Conway Hall, which has obviously been cancelled. And because of that, we've rewritten our calling question. And we're now asking how to enable small groups to form, exchange ideas, define shared purposes, in order to collaborate effectively and trade within a global network of like-minded commons building initiatives. And the webinars leading up to the 11th and 12th of June are specifically designed to try and highlight some of the existing platforms and protocols and tools that are out there already, so that we might cherry pick some of their best bits, or we might decide to swarm towards them as a whole community. Or just take the lessons learned and apply them elsewhere. So last week at this time, we heard from Stacko about discos, distributed co-ops. And this week, we're going to hear from Christina and Joachim and Graham about the Digital Life Collective. There's a link in the chat there to the shared docs. If you want to ask questions, type them into the chat on the side, or we can have hands up. And without further ado, I shall pass you straight over to Joachim and Christina, who are going to do a little joint presentation, try and save the bandwidth. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Christina Bowen. I'm a knowledge ecologist. I've been doing system and network mapping since about 2015, when I found a mapping platform and got really interested in organizational information flows. And I'll let Joachim and Graham introduce themselves before we dive in.
Thanks, Christina. Joachim here from Brooklyn, New York, epicenter of everything. So I am, my background is in computer science, business. I worked in HR consulting for many years. Always tried to bridge the gap. I was in a group called Knowledge Management. That was an important domain in 90s and early 2000s. Here really to talk about the social implications, what we can do in these new spaces that we're opening up around the globe now. What are the capabilities and how can we expand that further, tapping into a lot more of our potential. So looking forward to this. Thank you. Graham?
Thanks, Joachim. Hi, my name's Graham. I've been a sort of cooperative person really for most of my career in various shapes and forms. So my interest in Digital Life Collective is partly about its cooperative nature and the potential for that sort of international collaboration, cooperation at scale, which is the sort of one of the things that we're pursuing. I won't say any more at this stage.
So Joachim, do you want to boot up the presentation?
Yes, I will do so.
Your American bandwidth's definitely got the best video for me anyway. Looks very clear.
All right, take it over, Christina. You want to start with an introduction of what Dig Life is, where we came from?
So the Digital Life Collective really started in conversations that ranged over about a year and a half, basically a bunch of friends getting together and helping Philip Sheldrake think through the human interface project for his PhD. And eventually we would sometimes put together a pitch to try and get the whole thing funded for the human interface project. During that process, we realized how broken open source funding was and said, why don't we pool together and see what we can do if we work to support all of the projects in the ecosystem. And because I do maps, I made a map. Do you want to switch to? Oh, this is a wonderful Sanzuberi quote. So we're not trying to put up task boards and whatnot. We're trying to really look at what our new networked sea looks like.
Right, right. I increasingly use this in my presentations, right, to say, hey, this is about a much bigger picture here, and we're not assigning tasks to anyone. It's you know, we need to feel drawn to what we're doing here. And that's key to all of the tasks here. Okay, let me show you the map. I think that's the one you're talking about, Christina.
Yeah, this is, I think, the second or third iteration. This was done for the Decentralized Web Summit in 2018 in support of the decentralized web. And we also drew a line in the sand. We said, you know, there's some things happening in tech today that are very dystopian, and we don't want to support that. And we really don't know how to build trustworthy technologies. So that was our question.
Right, right. It's really moving, you know, when we hear over in the extractive consumer economy, we tried, you know, to build this collaborative sharing economy, not digital life, but, you know, that's what happened with a lot of these big startups, very centralized again, right? Switching over to the left side versus what we're seeing slowly emerging on the right side. So you can name it relationship economy, cooperative economy. There are many different labels for that, of course, right? With the focus more on our tech, right? So you own bits and pieces of that, you know, that you have more control over, versus over here in the extractive side, where it's about data that you sell, that you give away, and it's sold to third parties, right? All right, let's move on.
Next slide. So one of the things, yeah.
This is the pattern slide. Do you want to continue here, or should I take over, Christina?
Well, I just want to frame it saying that we also, as we framed up that question about trustworthiness, we mapped the ecosystem and drew a line in the sand. We realized that as a global and virtual and volunteer and tech focused, hence not very immediately non-white, non-male, and a relatively new volunteer organization, we had all of the problems, except we had very, very high trust. In trust, we were very rich. And so we started thinking about what that meant for how we went forward. What is the socio-technical stack? What are the human processes that can keep that trust as we grow?
Great. Yeah. So you mentioned an important word here, socio-technical stack, right? What does that really mean? So there's socio, there's cultural, there's relationships, and then there's the technology, of course. So we early on identified these high-level patterns, right? So 6 different patterns in building these kind of service-oriented platforms, right? That are focusing more on the human interactions, more on building the relationships among the people. And the way the patterns sort of came to be is one big one, of course, the conversational pattern, where you hold these generative and engaging conversations. That's typically the first pattern that arises, right? You get into your Slack space, let's say, you have a lot of Zoom conversations to kick off that kind of pattern. But then soon you see also organizational patterns arising, right? Where you begin to see some structures that are coming out of the conversations, right? Where you feel like, well, there's some circles, some groups here that need to be more organized, you know, more defined in terms of what they do for their participation levels. And then also the social psychological patterns here, right? So as Christina said, very important for us to build trusted spaces, right? So it's a safe space. It's a space where you can establish relationships and get to know the other people in the space. So there's a huge component here in terms of how do you enable that in an online space without, you know, being there in a physical, you know, face-to-face meeting. And then on the bottom here, it continues with some socioeconomic patterns, right? Where you do some accounting work, you do some, you know, data-driven stuff where you want to start recording your activities and your contributions, right? What have we done and what have we contributed to that? And I will show you more later, because that's one of the components that I'm working now in the Hi-Fi Seeds group to expand that a lot more. Then we have the rhizomatic patterns here, where it's really about growing roots and shoots, right? This is about reaching out into these local contexts, right? What is happening on the ground, right? And how can we connect these local groups, local activities to a global picture, right? So that other people can benefit from this shared space. And then sociocultural patterns, right? So this is more about reaching out, promoting things, and tapping into other areas in the wider network, right? So further out from your organization, right? So that's kind of the platform, the story, and we always mention that this is your platform too. This is your platform, and it's our story that we're creating here. So all of these patterns, bits and pieces, if you drill down a bit into each of these boxes here, you see individual pieces that we have assembled, and actually we can share that in the slide deck that we publish after that, so you can see more details behind this slide here, what these patterns look like. Okay, let me move on in interest of time here. One thing I mentioned, we don't want to stay in our boxes, right? So in our organizations, behind our desks, in our cubicles, right? There's a trend now to recognize there's kind of this shared space underneath, right? Kind of a meta body. And this is especially prevalent for all of the different communities that are now connecting here, that have a shared purpose, that are very aligned with each other, right? Especially in these difficult times, we recognize that so much activity is already out there, and we're beginning to see shared patterns and ways to connect and to create these what I call knowledge commons, right? Where we're reaching across, and certain portions of that can openly be shared. There's no reason why to hide it into our closets. There are some parts that are more sensitive, more on an organizational stovepipe level, which is okay, right? So we're saying there are entities out there, they have their own membranes, but increasingly they open up certain membranes for allowing some of the knowledge to flow across these different spaces. That's a fundamental aspect of the way of working in these more open, more participative spaces. Here's the slide with a more detail, but yeah, sure.
Before you switch slides.
Okay.
I just wanted to talk about, from an ecological point of view, if you think about membranes, they are semi-permeable. So those membranes are not like put all the humans that are in one team in a team and the membrane stays defined. The teaming is a verb, and those membranes have to be semi-permeable. And so what you keep private and what you open up is really dependent on the needs of the team at the time and the capacity for the team to be onboarding new people or orienting people. So I just wanted to really say, like, membranes and the ecology and like that semi-permeability is a very important concept there.
Well,
and
what's
Graham,
the OPO in this diagram?
Okay, OPO stands for Open Participatory Organization, and HO stands for Human Organization.
Graham, did you want to say anything on this slide before we go into the candy box slide about co-ops and how they play?
Unmute myself. Yes, I think what excites me about this approach is the creation of this sort of meta body that Joachim's labelled there on the diagram, in that it gives us opportunities to sort of break out of the silos, sort of informational and conversational silos that we tend to operate in. And we've had conversations both within the collective and in other spaces that I'm involved in about the idea of using sort of layered cooperative structures to facilitate this as well. So we were using the term multiplex cooperative to try and convey the idea of a sort of a fluid ecosystem of participants in a sort of an economy and an ecology which can change very quickly and very rapidly to meet the requirements. So, you know, we're well beyond that point, really, in our history where, you know, these old sort of Victorian concepts of the firm or the company, they don't really make so much sense anymore. So getting beyond those sort of boundaries and saying, okay, well, here's a project, you gather a team, you deliver the project, the team disappears and goes on to the next project, you know, and you're just like pulling people together and resources together as you need them, and creating legal structures if you need one, but you don't necessarily need one, you know. So you could, by having sort of an overarching framework and an umbrella, if you want, that stuff can happen underneath and it's protected and looked after and nurtured in that environment. So that's sort of part of what we're trying to progress here, this sort of idea of a sort of a nurturing framework.
Great, thank you, Graham. That expresses it so well, so right. You know, one more term that we're using a lot that Christina came up with early on was adjacent possible. So the adjacent possible is recognizing there are other players in this common space here, right? And just by knowing that they are there and the ability to reach out to them, to engage in a conversation that enriches this whole space a lot more, you know. Suddenly you have access to people that are like-minded, thinking about the same problems, the same issues, and have found different solutions for different things, right? So that's why, you know, if you keep this space open, trustful, right? So and about human interactions, you can get a lot out of this, and that's why we actually dove a lot deeper into what's possible in this highly interactive space, right? So let me move on in terms of time and skip this slide. I mentioned, you know, before you saw these 6 patterns here. So that's the slide that actually has the details behind these patterns in terms of what you could enable in each of these 6 patterns. So you can take a look at this later when we send the link to the presentation. Let's move on to the next slide. Another one about the human organization. By the way, a lot of the work here from Philip Sheldrake here too. He early on established some groundwork, you know, for creating these new types of organizations in his work. Key message here for this slide is you see these are these 2 triangles here. One says interactions and one says transactions. So as you typically move through an engagement, and by engagement I mean that can be a project, that can be a sub-circle in an organization that builds something, that co-creates something together, right? You typically start with a highly interactive mode of working, right? A lot of sense making, a lot of dialogue, a lot of decisions happening here. But as you move along towards some kind of an output, an outcome, right? You move more into a transactional space. So this is where you begin to see, hey, there's some patterns that we need to establish further, right? Some agreements we have to establish here, some value exchange between the participants, right? How are the contributions coming along? How are people rewarded in that space? So this is when you get more into a transactional space where you need to complement that interactive space. So for me, this is two sides of the same coin here. One is about the liveliness, the richness of the conversation. The other one is about the livelihood, that you actually can stay here and we provide you with the right rewards, so you can actually feed your family, you know, getting out of this for the amount of time and energy and ideas you spend in this space. So a very important complementary thing, and you will see this the demo I'm giving you is more in the interaction space for the Digital Life Collective, and will be more in the transactional space here for the demo in the Haifa DAO. So that to me is really the kind of the DAO space, the decentralized autonomous organization space, or we call it DHO, decentralized human organization space, where we want to record some of the transactions, but don't get overly structured, don't fall back into traditional patterns here. Okay.
Philip is actually on the call. So hi, Philip, if you can hear us, and jump in if you want to unmute and say something.
He's hiding somewhere.
He may also be on a work call and listening, so I know he had some conflicts.
Another important person on the call, Michael Linton, who has done work in open currencies, circular currencies, community currencies for decades. Yes. One aspect we're looking here is the way how you combine the sort of the blue kind of old fashioned, that's our fiat currencies, the hard currencies, interacting with these new green currencies, these community currencies that are slowly starting up in different places. So this diagram just says, you know, there's the blue stuff, we have to deal with this, and it flows in and out of these systems. Traditional organizations only deal with the blue stuff. The stuff we're doing with the Digital Life Collective and with the HiFi and Seeds project is building up these circular currencies, right? So you have some kind of an osmosis, a process to convert the blue into the green. Once it's green, then you can actually begin to start, you know, these transactions between different communities who are also using these kind of currencies. So to me, it's a very exciting space, time and space for trying out these token-based economies that are built on these new third-generation blockchains, right? So that are more energy efficient and more geared towards local community activities rather than, you know, the first and second generation that are more for industrial type processes. All right, let's move on. Oh, Christina, you want to say something about this?
If I can find my unmute button. This was so fun to make. So I'm a mapper. I'm usually building maps with data structures, and I hadn't gotten to play with this particular candy box slide as a data structure. And it's, you know, if you see your organization up there or organization you're familiar with, maybe it's in the wrong place because the data structure is kind of fuzzy still. But it was very fun to make. It would be interesting to see a different iterations. It would be interesting to see answers from organizations about what they're actually trying to provide. As I began to realize more why I think it's really important that Joachim talked to Noah from Makerspace, because HiFi and Maker actually ended up in the same place. it was really fun. So I think it's kind of visually, I guess I would kind of like to see if anybody has any questions about this at the end. Maybe this is a really fun slide. I don't have much to say about it except for this is the ecosystem. We're not intending to like build the Digital Life Collective and do all these services ourselves. Like this is already happening. This whole future possible that we think is future is here. It's just not evenly visible.
If I could just jump in here, I think, you know, for me, this sort of captures a lot of the potential really of where we are and the direction that we're heading in. The fact that we've got these various groups and teams and organizations that are getting on board and coming together in this framework is for me really exciting, because it, you know, where we normally come from in our organizations, we think, okay, I'm with platform 6 there in the top middle segment, and so we've been using Slack for our team chat, just because, you know, that's what half the world does when they start a new thing. They jump onto that, and then they realize how limiting it is, and then it's really difficult to get off again. So on a very, very practical day-to-day level, the fact that we can use the Mattermost server, which is the sort of open source Slack alternative that sits within the Digital Life Collective, that's great. We can jump in and use that. But more broadly, it means that we can start to have conversations with some of these other groups, and we can start that process of more open collaboration and the cross-fertilization that might come from peeking into somebody else's space and seeing what's interesting about what they're doing, starting to share those things. And that's really exciting, I think. And, you know, from our point of view, within Platform 6, we're there because, well, partly because we're really interested in cooperative development and how you do that. And we're interested in how you can do that outside of those traditional geographic frameworks and boundaries that that cooperative development has traditionally happened in. So we can now start to talk to people internationally and in different jurisdictions with different traditions and conventions, and that's really, there's lots of possibilities immediately open up from that, which is great.
The last thing I want to say is just looking at this, the little mountaintop over by Notens and Wikis, right there is Robert Best, who's also on the call, Open Learning Commons. And obviously the Open Learning Commons also should be over on education and language. And so there's a need for this map to be dynamic. I'm obviously going to make one soon. Anybody who wants to help with that data structure, I would love that. So.
Thank you. And thanks, Graham. That was a great insight there. Yeah, I love it. Love it. I love the juxtaposition here too of a digital life collective to a lot around protocols, principles. How do you work in a sociocratic context, right? Here's the HIFA logo where I'm diving deep into the contribution accounting flows and currencies, right? And here's Michael Linton's work on the open currency. So let's move on. So where does it lead us? One sort of trend, don't want to call it a trend or, you know, sort of attractor I see in a lot of this is working on the next frontier. How do we push this further, attract more people? And yeah, Christina?
Before you jump in, I really want to ground this in the fact that like what feels like the cutting edge of tech, what feels like new meta body, whatever, is how like tribes and networks and communities have been working in physical places on the ground for years, for decades, for centuries, right? Networked working is how we work. We just don't know how to do it in the virtual space yet. And so grounding our virtual space in bioregions, in ecosystems, in the things that sustain life on the planet is so important. Thank you,
Christina. Perfect. Yeah, so this is a common denominator, a very strong attractor, I feel. And a lot of my work is now shifting into how do you communicate, build activities around these bioregions. Here's a quick definition slide about bioregions. And you know, the more you look into this, you see how complex, of course, it is complex in our space. It is, right? So what is a bioregion, right? How does it span across these different boundaries, right? How do you structure it? How do you look at this from a geological, ecological, sociocultural, you know, indigenous, biological perspective? It's a fascinating space. So one thing we're doing also in the HIFA space is building maps to say where are the different activities starting to boot up in these different bioregions. One of them, for example, here is Tamarindo in Costa Rica, where we have started to cooperate with the UCI. It's a university in northern Costa Rica, on rebuilding some of the ecosystems and supporting the ecotourism and supporting the activities in northwestern Costa Rica. And the idea is to dive into that and say, okay, what's your context really, right? So for Tamarindo, what is happening in this space, and tie that also increasingly to sort of data collection efforts, right? Standardization of data. One effort we're just starting to put up there is around the donut economics model from Kate Raworth, who is on the team too, where you begin to look at you know, ecological ceilings and social foundations and where they overshoot and where they have some shortcomings there. So there's an interesting combination of the spaces that we create, where we work in, right, diving into bioregions, but also within organizations, right, very similar circular structures, right, holonic structures where you divide folks into circles and focus on the work. So all working together on these common goals, shared goals on doing some things. So let me switch gear a bit. This is a slide about the DAO, right? We call it, again, Decentralized Human Organization, or DAO. Where I see one of the key functions here is talking about what I call decentralized payroll. And that's an interesting term because payroll is something everybody's familiar with, right? Every organization has to deal with that. There are large organizations here in the US who provide payroll services, right? But how does that whole thing look in a decentralized environment? And suddenly you're like, whoa, hold on a second. That means roles are defined by people. You know, there are payment processes that people are signing and working in these roles. There's different skill sets now coming up. It changes the entire picture. And so one of the things for me is to see how does a decentralized payroll and contribution accounting system look like in this new world, right? And we started to implement some aspects of this. You see the gray boxes are the ones that we have implemented now in terms of defining roles, letting people assign and apply for these roles, and paying the rewards in token currencies, right? So they get compound currencies for the work they do in a specific role, and also for contributions. So this is where the new aspects or the new contexts come in terms of by regions, or up here, organization, right? To me is another context with, say, sociocratic circle structures that are tied to budgeting and accounting procedures. So a lot of this stuff, and that's what Graham mentioned earlier, right? So you don't want to deal with all of these different pieces. You know, if people have thought about this, if there's a process, a place for you to hook into this and say, here's my space, here's my role we defined for organization, here's how can our members can now, you know, apply for that role and get rewarded in this new circular currency, that's great. So we don't have to think about and worry about that kind of process. So again, it's a shared commons-based space where we try to expand that now going forward into other activities, launching trial balloons, right? Recording some milestones, and then protocols too, right? But protocols that are more specific around the payroll aspects and the governance around how do you fairly reward people in these spaces. Okay, I think that's enough about slides now. I want to show you some hands-on stuff, what we've been doing with the Digital Life Collective. Unless there are other questions here, then we can switch gear to demo time.
I think that looks good. I'm keen to see some of this in action, Joachim. So boot up the demo.
Alrighty, booting up. I wish I had a sound effect. You know, I'm doing another thing called Knowledge Expeditions where we have a lot of sound effect, and one of them is this boot up sound effect with the engine starting up, or, you know, some natural sound effects coming in here.
We can all make one for you if you want.
Okay. All right, let's start with the DigLife portal. So our members, they can go to diglife.coop, simple address, and then everybody has a username there. And notice I didn't even put in a password here. That's because the actual access is happening on a lower level. So once you get into the tool sets, that's where the team can decide if you're a member, if you can get into that or not. But again, remember the other slide was about the adjacent possible. So you do want to see who else is here, you know, what are people doing in this space, and how the high level structures look like, right? So the stuff that can get shared, you know, that you don't have to log in a closet and hide away from everyone else. That's this playground here, right? That's the idea. So it starts with the holonic space where you can actually see, you know, when I click on the Dig Live box here, a holon really, right? I can drill down and see what is happening in terms of the circle structure that we build, right? So we have a welcome orientation circle. Here's the collective chat. You can see all the different members in that chat, right? The big one, obviously, around technology we might trust, right? So this is explorative and see what else is out there. But the idea is sort of to give you a higher level entry point to say, okay, there are different players here at work. And they have different spaces, right? So there are membranes you can move between. You know, the first ones here, this is about the Digital Life Collective, and you can see other players, other friends, you know, other alliances we have with people playing in this space, right?
So let's just be clear here, Joachim. Are all of those icons along the top, they're different projects, and how do they relate to the different circles we see in your holon view?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Christina.
Those are very analogous to the when you join multiple Slacks, you have multiple squares down the left sidebar. Those are literally those from Mattermost.
Okay.
So each team is like that, but they're not, they're on the same server, but they're their own teams. And so the teams themselves have to make the pipelines if they want people to be able to join. They can't just join another team from the same server without going through whatever that team's membrane is.
And how do they relate to the circles we see below?
Yeah, the best thing is let me dive into one of them. So you see the connection also between this and how Mattermost, kind of the Slack type environment works in our place. So let me go here to collective chat, right? And now click one more time, and then you can see now that I'm opening up Mattermost. So now I'm suddenly inside the chat environment, where I can see the conversations happening. So I remember I clicked on collective chat within the Digital Life Collective. So this is where you see these different tiles here again, the same tiles that you see across here at the top, right? So they're on the left side. So within Mattermost, we subdivided these spaces too, and you can have your own space for your own conversations, right? So here's Digital Life, here's the collective chat, and here's the conversation, right? So this is the typical chat space you have with tools like Mattermost, like Slack, like Telegram. There's so many out there. We found Mattermost a better tool because it's open source, because we actually own that instance. There is a tool, an application provider service that you can install on your own server, that really makes it easy for you to maintain these applications. Otherwise, you would have to fill so many maintenance roles at this, just to keep it up and running. With this application server, it's a no task. It's just you kick it off, it runs, and it updates all of the applications you are using. So talking about the applications, so Mattermost is one slice for one team, for one domain here within one, and this collective chat, this could be a circle, this could be a channel that you use for your purpose, right? It could break into other types of conversations, right? So we have a nomenclature that says, the one with the exclamation mark, they're important channels, move them to the top. The one with this hashtag, they're more informal, they're more topic oriented, right? So here are other kinds of conversations that are happening.
And Ollie, in those things, on the holonic chart, the exclamation points go in a separate circle, so you can see at a glance, here are the key important channels, and then this whole ecosystem of discussion stuff. So those basic little conventions of just that putting that special character sorts them in the portal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sorts it here, and the other view we had is this is kind of the same view, where you have the different circles. Again, you zoom in and you go onto that level of a conversation. So conversation is just one aspect and one slice of building this. Another one is the network map, just seeing who is actually involved here. This is actually more, I have to say, more eye candy than real actual practical use. I mean, it's nice to see these connections, but if you tie them too tight, there's too much going on here. This is actually a trusted graph based on the skill sets. So who's that? It's Lauren. Lauren has these different skill sets here, and they overlap with others who have the same skill sets. So here's my avatar, and you can see like knowledge management. So Lauren put knowledge management into her skill sets. So there's a connection between me and Lauren. But we use it mostly to quickly see who's here, and also there I see these isolated ones like Peter Van here, is sort of loosely joined, so he's not really defined who he is and what he does and how he's connected to others, which is fine, right? It's just a good way to see, maybe here's a new person, here's Narayan, right? So you see he joined actually 6 days ago. Has a couple of good skill sets and actually knowledge management too. So would be a good opportunity for me to reach out to Narayan and introduce myself. See, the dotted line here is an indicator to say, hey, new person, maybe you want to talk to him or her to see how he wants to connect with us, right? So just one way to build these trusted relationships, right? To share that kind of information.
It's really smart, Joachim. I really like that. Can we just clarify exactly how these grey lines are built? So I'm presuming that they must be based on the amount of messages or direct messages that happened within the Mattermost. Is that correct, or is it some other way?
That would be one way, one metric to use, the exchanges of messages. That's typically what you see in these kind of relationship charts. What we're using here is actually these skill sets that you see popping up here. So if I have a relationship, if my skill set includes knowledge management, I am connected to other people now with that particular skill set or trait, right? It's really a trait. So you can see Lauren has this knowledge management thing here too. There's Philip down here, so Philip has like decision making is I think on mine, strategy, collaboration obviously is part of my skill set. So that's the overlap here. That's the line here that's built. And the thicker the line is, that means the more skills we share.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
And that has tons of potential. As Joachim said, this is like a eye candy version. I can't wait till that's interoperable. That could be hugely powerful.
All right, let's move on because there's more. There is channels. So this is, for me, a way to explore different user interfaces. Doing a lot of work now in what's called intentional interfaces that actually help you to decide and to see what's going on and where I want to dive in, right? So here's a picture of all of the different channels, all of the different conversations that are happening across the collective. And I could decide from here, do I want to join that channel or not, right? So at a high level, here's the emergent strategy. It shows me, okay, I already joined that space. I can open it, and then I would go right back into that corresponding Mattermost channel, right? Or I can leave it. I can see who's in here, right? A couple of folks I know already. Here's Jim Weitscover. You should know him. He's one of the inventors of the internet, worked with HTML protocols and WC. 3C.
Can I say something there?
Yeah, sure.
So on the emergent strategy or the maps interchange channel, you can see that Joachim can request access. This to me is one of the most powerful parts of the portal for immediate low-hanging fruit, that as somebody who is not in a private channel in Slack, that is immediately an in-group dynamic and a dark pattern as soon as you make one, because new people can't find it. And the portal allows you to see that it exists, to see what skills you would need, to see who might be there and who you might know, and to knock on the door. And that allows the team to have a coherent membrane, but to get rid of the dark pattern possibility. And all that a team needs to do is add the ledger bot to their channel to have that show up. So I love that part.
Thank you. Yeah. So this is really to, one side it's making sure you control who's in the team. On the other side, it's a good way to keep the team to a whole, right size and decide who's in and who's out. So that's always there. So that's channels. One more before I switch to the Haifa DAO, show you some things going on there. This is the notes view where we develop more slowly flowing long-term documents, right? So
on this, will you switch just like this is everything, or I don't know what you're in, but you make sure to show projects so you can see like the difference between teams that are really working and just some like high level lightweight protocols.
That's right. So what I can do, what Christina mentioned, I can go between the different domains here, right? And you can see depending on which domain we're in, there are different levels of activity. So here's one in the maps that is focused now on some nodes around mapping, coordination, right? Here's an empathy protocol. So this is a document, it's called CodeMD, one of the tool sets we have, again, on the application server. So we install it once, it just runs. There's no more sysadmin or maintenance necessary. And it's a very simple document-centric tool, right? So this is, again, coming out of the fast flow of these conversations, of these chat tools. We felt like there's an important piece where we have to slow down and say, let's keep the co-creation, let's keep the aspect of we're working together on this, building the story together, but make it easy to jump into spaces that are more structured, right? So documents that you can create. Certainly you could use a Google document here, but again, we're trying to move slowly away from some of the centralized services, right? To say what else is out there, what better tech is out there that's more open source, more in our control than others who might extract a lot of information that we don't want to be extracted from there. So we felt CodeMD is one nice tool that's using something called Markdown, where you can write in very plain text mode the important pieces. For me, it's a great sort of brain supporting thing. Like I put a lot of my thoughts into different nodes and share certain nodes, and others I just use them for myself. So it's an interesting tool. We're using them. Yeah.
Are we close to done?
We're kind of running out of time. Yeah, we want to leave enough time for everybody to have questions and to be able to possibly break out and have little chats as well. So I know you wanted to show Haifa, Joachim. Maybe you can just give us the speedy overview so we can get back and join the discussion.
All right, speedy overview. Switch gears. This is Haifa here, and I'm going to show you one part of Haifa. I mentioned this is decentralized payroll, contribution accounting. So this is an easy way for people to define new roles in the system. This is on production here. This is actually the roles you see here are the current roles that are proposed within the Haifa environment. So we're using that system now to build the DAO. It's using the DAO to build the DAO, kind of a bootstrapping process, right? This is where you can see a little bit of how voting works, right? So you suddenly have some decision-making components becoming active here. You can see if people are in and out of certain roles. Here's a translator role, right? Here's an outreach experience artist. So there are people actually behind the roles now. And that goes further into, you can now actually apply for these roles, right? And start working in these different roles and create these assignments. So what you see here is all roles that people have now created on their own, right? Highly decentralized roles that then the community reviewed, right? And felt like that's an important role to have. Let's vote that person into the role. And then from that point on, the reward process kicks in, right? And he or she will then get rewarded in certain tokens, right? With US dollar equivalencies. So this is the livelihood part of the coin, right? So liveliness in the interactions. But if you go beyond that and want to actually commit yourself into certain work streams, then you need something like a transactional piece where these kind of roles can be further defined and used for building your organization, right? Building your community or moving your community past the initial, getting together, having good conversation stage, right? All right, with that, thank you. Let me close the sharing here.
Let's just ask a couple of questions there about Haifa, just to put the two in context, Joachim.
Sure.
So is the idea that Haifa will become part of Digital Life Collective, or Digital Life Collective will use some of those tools?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. What we're starting to do is inviting organizations into Haifa. So those who feel like we would like to have or try out this transactional piece, right? We have some roles now defined, right? We know what people are doing. They have commitment levels, but we have no way to really reward them and to track what's happening. So they could define their own space in Haifa. See how far they aligned also. Again, this is a very adjacent possible space, right? So Haifa currently has about 200 organizations who are interested in working with us, who will be slowly onboarded. And they all more or less have the same mission, vision, idea of building a regenerative society. That's the broader topic of the Haifa and Seeds project. And we're starting to onboard, and again, it's an experiment for many, right? Finding out how that actually works, how you can work with the third generation tokens and so forth.
I just want to add, it's like when you say will the Digital Life Collective, you could be talking about all of those holons in the Dig Life spaces. That will never happen. So the Dig Life stewards might decide Haifa is the tool that they want to use, right? Because the stewards and the brand and the website and the core team that's been building that. But the Dig Life Maps team might decide they want to use something else, or we don't want contribution tracking because we're just like the community of practice, and or we don't, or we might implement open muddy in an experimental way on FedWiki or like something completely different. And it doesn't matter because the team gets to define the membrane boundary and the tools they use within it, and they can implement or not implement. They're not monolithic.
Sure, but it does seem like there's some integration, right? If Hypha is not integrated to the existing, then hard for others to use that kind of single sign-on and make benefit of tools.
So the API ecosystem will need to be very rich, right?
Right.
And protocols.
Protocols, that's a big one, right? So what we're sharing here is protocols is sort of these intentional user interfaces, right? So you see the cards on the Dig Live side, you see cards over here, and as one metaphor really to say these are becoming what's called boundary object. Susan Starley talked a lot about boundary objects and how they can actually preserve their shape, preserve their meaning, right, while moving from community to community, right? Inviting roles into your own community, starting to exchange value here through these card-based interfaces is a very interesting aspect that's playing a role here.
So just wanted to touch quickly on the difference between the kind of chat groups and the perhaps what I would describe as working groups. It seems within the Digital Life Collective, there's quite a lot of chat groups going on. There's a lot of discussion, but it seemed more like the Hypha design was aimed at tracking contributions in more of a sort of economical way. Is that a fair distinction? And is that purposeful?
Very good, very good. You see, with Hypha, we wanted to focus on the financial transactional flows, right, and stay sort of agnostic to the conversational patterns, right. What we eventually will see in Hypha is maybe a card that says, "Hey, there's a conversation happening about this wall. Click here," and then you're moving over into your conversational space, right? Since we're agnostic, it doesn't mean it has to be in Mattermost, right? If your team or if your organization prefers other tools, then so be it, right? So the conversation moves into a Slack space, moves into a Telegram space, right? But it's important to have, that's right, matrix space, right space. So these are all options you have available. Important is you have kind of a way station, a point of entry where you connect all the different pieces and say, hey, that's where all these members are active, right? And if I want to, I can join and help them out. And I may have to switch protocol here because they communicate in a different way, but that's okay. We need to be inclusive. That's really an essential point here. We don't want to wrap it down to this is one other monolithic application, one other tech stack, right, that enforces you to work in a certain pattern, right? And this is it. If you don't want to work in this pattern, then we have to leave the stack, right? We do the other way and say, invite you into this space, bring your own tools, and see if you can adjust your own way of working, if you want to work with others, right? Using then their tool sets.
Got you. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I like the attitude to, look more towards protocols than anything else, because that seems essential in order to kind of unite people and groups from these different platforms.
And it's not just tech, it's social protocols.
Right. So yeah, we've got 35 minutes left, and we were going to have a little breakout because there's almost 40 people here and quite hard to have a general conversation, but we'll kick that off in 5 minutes. So I just wanted to see if anybody wanted to raise their hand or ask any specific clarifying questions before we break out, to use the next 5 minutes just to sort of, make sure that everybody's on the same page. If anybody's got any burning questions that they think everybody would benefit from hearing the answers to. So anybody jump in, unmute yourself, or stick your hand up.
I just want to say, really congratulations. I've been watching this project with the Hypha DAO, and the progress is just unbelievable. Congratulations, amazing work.
I have to say that we tease Joachim that he's got clones. He's got at least 30 clones of himself to do as much as he does.
There was a question in there about seeds. So we've seen some mention of seeds, and somebody asked in the chat if somebody can explain the seeds currency and whether it's related to transactions for services performed.
Yeah, I would encourage you to go to the website. There's a lot of information, white papers, and all the stuff you need to figure out what Seeds is about. It's called Join Seeds, joinseeds.com. And Reiki is the core person there, working a lot with him. And as Grace mentioned, a lot of great people on board there to build this regenerative currency in society.
And Seeds is built on HiFiDAO, is that right? Or how does that interact?
So technically, right. So Seeds is, I mentioned it's a third generation blockchain. It's called Telos. That's built on EOS.io. And HiFi is sort of the layer on top of that. Very much like the DigLife portal is a layer on some of these existing application services, right? HiFi is in a layer on top of these transactional service layers. Building projects, building roles, right? Rewarding people with that thing and making decisions, right? So governance, as Grace will know, there's a lot of conversation happening about governance right now. How do you make these decisions in these crazy spaces? So we're attempting it, right? There's one way of doing that in a context of an organization, in the context of a bioregion, right? To move their projects forward. But everybody is really, tapping now. It's a new territory for all of us to explore that space.
And since nobody else is putting their hand up and jumping in, I'm going to keep asking questions. There isn't any problem with of the platforms that sit behind HiFi. Like, we're all very environmentally conscious here, and we're all aware of the energy consumption of some blockchain projects. Can you say something reassuring about HiFi in that respect?
Right. Yeah, I mentioned third generation. So what does that mean? Bitcoin is first generation, highly, consumptive, and centralized, really, right? Versus the Ethereum space starting to tap into the smart contract layer, right? So we're seeing some efficiencies there, but still, very expensive, sharing the ledger globally across all the participants, right? So the third generations break that even further down to sort of process these transactions on the blockchain for only those involved, right? Another great player in this space is Holochain, right? They're also a third generation blockchain that do exactly this, build this new kind of infrastructure. They call it sort of the new world, new internet. And I can see other players too. There's a new one coming up now that also tries to rebuild the infrastructure that's needed, become even more efficient. And that's amazing what's coming out of this space to reduce the power consumption of these highly transactional networks that make it feasible now really to tap into a global network of, similar to, you can compare that to, credit card payments. These are billions, trillions of transactions we have to deal at some point, if that takes off, then you need to have the infrastructure in place to handle all this. And in a way that's not going back to centralized models, right? It's not handing it over to Google, to Facebook, to whoever, to handle these transactions, or the banks even, right? And this way get into, of course, into governmental issues with who's actually now regulating all this stuff, and how far does that take us, restrict us really to working in these global chains. We're already working in these spaces, right? But we see, others have to pick up here and see that we align now with the old concepts, traditional ways of working.
Perfect. So, yeah, since nobody else seems to have any burning questions, we're going to switch to some breakout rooms now. And we've got a couple of questions in the shared doc. Simon has shared the link in the chat there. Christina is keen to get feedback from what you all think about the Digital Life Collective and its tools. So, excuse me, there's the first question, which aspects of the collective tools and processes do you like and why? And then underneath those, what would you like to get out of Digital Life Collective? What would you want to use? What would motivate you to join? And what would you be excited to participate in if you did? And why we still can't build one common co-op brand around all the commons we have achieved so far. So those are some ideas for topics for your breakout rooms. We'll discuss those ideas in those rooms. which will be randomly allocated. So you'll end up in a breakout room with 4 or 5 other people in a moment. And then in 10 minutes time, we'll come back and we'll have some feedback.
I would suggest 3 or 4, Oliver, and 3 or 4, let's make it 3 or 4 people. And you can ask, the first question could be, which of these questions do you respond to most?
See you all soon. Okay, that looked like it worked. Is everybody here in this room still able to hear me? Matthew, Mark, Amy, and Roy.
Yes, I am. I'm actually observing and not participating right now. I've got other things going on. This is Amy, thanks.
No problem. Cheers, Amy. Is Catherine Leeds and Mark and Roy, are you there? You can probably unmute now and yeah, leave your cameras on if you've got some bandwidth.
Sorry, my computer just crashed. Hello.
Amy has said that she's busy, she's not participating, she's just listening in, and not sure if Roy is there and can hear us. Looks like it is.
And if you'd prefer not, I can leave too. I don't want to be a vampire here.
I think
you're allowed to be a fly on the wall. That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, just full disclosure. That's where I'm at. Thank you.
So is it the 4 of us, or no? There's someone else here. Is all right. I guess I'm here because I'm part of Platform 6, and I often try and understand what Graham's talking about. I thought this might help, and I am absolutely kind of overwhelmed with the number of new terms, and also so lots of ideas get reified or encapsulated and then kind of taken up. So actually I can't think of a single one, but there were lots of sort of ideas in there that porous boundaries wasn't one of them, but an idea object or something was one of them. And there were various ideas that everyone kind of grabs and runs with, and like I'm still sort of in this wake going, what are you all talking about?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you. Like we heard about semi-permeable membranes and things like that, and
I can actually even understand.
Well, that one's not too bad, is it? But no, there was a bunch of other terms there, and actually when I sent out the invitations to last week's seminar, somebody just emailed back really angrily going, what the hell does this email even mean? It uses loads of terms that I don't even understand, and when I looked them up, it didn't help. So we actually have a thread going in the forum, which is about defining some of the terms of the commons and trying to sort of, find simpler ways to explain some of these things to people. And we started last week's session with, just some clear definitions, like what is the commons and what is a co-op and things like that. And I'm realizing now that you've said that, Kath, like we blatantly failed this time round, and probably there is too much jargon, right?
Actually, that's not even to a degree that the concern I have, and it's obvious in all organizations, I think, but particularly those organizations which are filled with people who are getting excited by sharing ideas and then doing something with them. And you kind of inevitably create, or one inevitably creates a kind of a trail of people catching up. But the distance between the front and the back gets wider and wider.
It's like the new economy version of the pay gap.
Yes. Well, it is. It's the knowledge gap.
The knowledge gap.
And it's kind of it's very difficult to overcome because it's so exciting to be at the front of.
Yeah, absolutely. Roy, have you got thoughts on this?
No, well, like I said, I mean, I joined Dig Life about 3 years ago, and I'm now on the board, and I still don't know what half the terms are. So, because as you say, I mean, look, the important thing, I suppose, about Dig Life is you've got these 2 stacks working almost side by side, and so you've got the social stack and you've got the technical stack, and both of which are moving ahead in leaps and bounds in virtual spaces, in both being enabled by technologies. And of course, we're creating, as Kat says, we're creating new languages. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, I haven't had a conversation with Joachim, or I haven't had a roundup from Joachim for quite some time. And actually coming to this was wonderful, because it gave me a bird's eye view of something that's been happening over the last 6-7 months. You know, where I've actually gone, oh, right, so that's where we are now, because this thing has extended. I mean, we've been having this long debate for ages, even when CAS was still a social ledger. So, you know, CAS, social ledger kind of moved into CAS, and then so what is CAS? And CAS is partly a tech stack, it's partly a social stack, it's partly interrelational. There's so many facets to it. And I think the other thing is that because it's evolving in the cooperative, collaborative space, it functions in a way that's quite alien to most of the existing softwares that are in the general public domain. So if you're familiar with Slack, or if you're familiar with Microsoft 365 or Google or whatever it happens to be, they've all more or less defaulted to a commonality. There are subtle differences between one and another, but they all kind of work within the same. The thing about DigLife is it's constantly iterating and evolving. So as others come in and on board, it changes its nature. And you can sort of see it. You know, sometimes the UX is absolutely fit for purpose, and then at other times the UX isn't quite right, and it sort of gets updated and remanaged, and it expands or grows. So it's a very dynamic space, which is inevitably is going to make it. You do have to be engaged. The question is how and where are you engaged? And you know, as everybody I think who's in this space recognizes, nobody has answers yet. This is a constantly evolving at every level.
That was going to be my next question to you, actually. So you've both said you're part of Digital Life Collective, but I'm interested in sort of how, and the question that you just asked, Roy, like, you know, how are you involved? What are you doing? What are you trying to do?
I came on board because I've got a long interest in digitally enabled community spaces. I launched CompuServe in Europe. So if anybody's of that, and I also launched Lotus Notes in Europe. So for me, that was the first inkling of the fact that I come from a television background, a broadcast background. So the situation was, how do you create a communal structure that facilitates TV productions or film productions or whatever? You know, these are temporary environments where people with skills, trust, etc., come together, they iterate on a project, and then it all breaks apart. But you have a common vision. And so I can't even recall how I bumped into DigLife somehow, somewhere. And I thought, this looks interesting from a technological standpoint and also from a social standpoint, because it may move towards answering some of those questions. I'll say that was about 3 years ago. So I sort of eavesdropped for about a year, trying to make my way through what was going on. And eventually there was a need for some kind of publicity, and we were looking at marketing and a few things like that. And I said, well, look, you know, I'll step into that. I'll happily try and help out on the social media side, and the things that I'm familiar with, you know. So that's kind of where my interest came. So multiple elements of what is in DigLife are of interest to me, and I watch it in some respects as an experiment, and I try to facilitate it as and when I can, sometimes more than other times. So yeah, that's my involvement.
How about you, Kath? We've only got a minute or so. I'm just going to tell people we're closing the room soon, but yeah, interested in how you came across DigLife and how you use it. Still there, Kath? Oh, Kath's gone.
She's gone.
Oh, that's a shame. So yeah, have you used many of the tools, Roy? Do you go in?
I don't know. I mean, I use them because we use them, you know, as Joachim says, we eat our own dog food. So we kind of use the toolkits to facilitate our meetings and all the rest of it. I mean, I don't have an organization per se that necessarily needs the scale that's potentially available. But I mean, I'm involved in quite a few other projects, all of which in time or at some point could could evolve into using the stack. I think that's,
Yeah.
you know, I'm looking for something. I mean, I tend to work in areas that are slightly more bolted down. They're slightly more traditional. So, yeah, but I'm hoping that certainly things like value tracking, I'm working on some distributed projects at the moment where value tracking will become potentially very, very useful to us. So using Hypha, using tokenized value chains, these sorts of things, absolutely would like to bring them in. Governance potentially. You know, the other thing I suppose is that it's not quite a one-stop shop, but at least it keeps, if I dip in and out, I get a sense of who else is in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I start saying, oh, so-and-so's there. Oh, I mean, Seeds was a classic example.
Right.
I mean, I'm a member of Seeds. I've signed up, I've joined up, I've bought Seeds and whatever, but it would never have happened if I hadn't known that Joachim was working on that space. And I was kind of looking at third generation blockchains and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
We're going to have to jump back into the main space, or we're going to run out of time, I'm afraid. Sorry you bombed out there, Kath. We did want to hear from you.
Computer's just not very reliable.
Yeah, I guess that was the case. I was just saying, hey, Kath, how do you use DigLife? And then you disappeared.
Oh yeah, I don't yet, but I think Platform 6 will drag us into it.
Okay. Hi, Gary. Sorry, you've joined us. Do you want to give us a 40-second feedback on how you like DigLife? You're muted.
Did I do something which joined you? Anyway.
So, were you in Breakout and you just jumped here?
Sorry? I just jumped there. I don't know how.
This is presumably now turned back into the main room. So slowly everybody else will gather here.
Well, I'll say my interest is in short-term proof of concept stuff because I think we're in a new social phase, the beginnings of the end of coronavirus lockdown, which will be going on for a long phase. There'll be people who are more available, and there are lots of people who've got no money or very little money. This might be the chance we've got to build in mutual credit, the right sort of discussion systems, build some rapid, some practically usable prototypes for a community level where people are not expecting anything very sophisticated.
I'd put in for mutual commitment, Gary. Mutual credits had a long run, but it's getting a little confused, got a bit muddy in that bucket. Mutual commitment is a different perspective on exactly the same thing. It's basically like making the glass half full when it's beginning to look half empty.
Great, Michael. Michael, you and I and John Waters, I think, have a nice conversation pending, which I hope will happen soon.
Penned. Right on.
Right.
Somebody's asking why they've changed rooms. So I believe that now we have, that was the breakout rooms have finished and that everybody has joined back here. We seem to have lost some people in the process. There's now only 30 participants. But still, I hope you managed to have some useful conversations. Would anybody in particular like to feed back?
I was in the middle of a very useful conversation when I suddenly found myself teleported here. And there seemed to be just 5 of us.
That's a shame. You should have got a 60-second warning.
I probably did, but I didn't read it because I was too busy talking to the people. It was a good conversation.
Lesson for next time, we'll give people a bit longer.
So any particular feedback on the questions? I know that our conversation didn't necessarily touch on exactly the points, but it did make me realize actually a lot of the people here are actually part of DigLife Collective, and I know that some aren't. So I wondered if we could just have a quick kind of show of hands, which maybe we can do by everybody turning their camera on. And if you're part of Digital Life Collective, put your hands up, just so we get a kind of feel for who's part of the organization.
I don't know, because I joined it about a year and a half ago, about 2 years ago, but by sheer chance when Michael and Les Moore introduced me to it. And I've never received any email notifications from them, despite actually having set that in my profile. So out of sight, out of mind, I'd forget about them until Michael and Les reminded me about them. yeah, I'm not sure where I am.
There you go, Christina. There's some onboarding feedback for you. I guess one of the main ways to know whether you're part of it is whether you're receiving emails and whether you're paying. Because if I'm right, it costs a little bit of money to be part of Digital Life Collective. Is that true?
It's $10 per person per year to run the server. And definitely we're at the point right now where we need to overcome the hump before we can pay somebody. We need at least part-time member relations person and at least part-time sysadmin. Like that's just where we're at. We're in this uncomfortable growing phase where we can't just be happy volunteers anymore.
That's the nature of, yeah, growing communities. But no, there's some useful feedback there in the chat as well. Other people not entirely sure whether they're still a paid up joined member and receiving emails. So I think that's hopefully very useful. One thing that we discussed in our group was the idea of terminology came up again, as it did last week. And people saying that even in the presentation there, that they got quite lost by some of the terms that were used, and how this is a constantly evolving complex issue, because not only are you developing a technological stack, you're also developing a social stack. And both of those things come with new terminology, which gets bandied around. And Kath describes like the difference between the people that are leading and the people that are trying to keep up, and how that can become an ever increasing distance, kind of like the pay gap in a conventional organization. So I think that's probably another bit of feedback is, for the onboarding process, it's important for people to have somewhere to go to learn about the terminology that's used. Don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that or feedback from what was discussed in their group.
We do have a glossary on the site and would love help. I've put that in the chat. Get in touch if you want to help with that.
Any more feedback from other discussions?
I would love Benedict to be able to speak. He was alone in a breakout.
Yeah, I did too.
Hi. Yes, my name is Ben. I'm from a cooperative in Toronto called HIFA, confusingly. And I found out about this call in the CoTech forum. So I started thinking about like, why am I on the CoTech forum at all in the first place? I think I joined because they're having discussions that relates to our business, like understanding how other cooperatives are doing internal organizations, what tools they're using. There are also like opportunities of grants and like job postings and like people hire through the forum and people get hired through the forum. And to me, it seems like being able to foster this type of economic activity is like a big incentive for groups to join. And it seems to me, looking at the tools of CoTech, it seems like it has a lot of the soil for like this sort of interaction to take place. It allows us to visualize how people are related, what are the value alignments between different people and different organizations. And there seems to be ways for like to remove the friction point of like, how do you get in touch with an organization? Like you can quickly click and then like join a chat and do this sort of stuff. So some of the foundations of building economic exchange, like building trust and being able to know where people are, that already exists in this ecosystem. So I guess being able to like build upon that and like to be clear what digital life allows us to do, like what does it mean to be a member, I think it would be very helpful. And build up to like a platform that can let members facilitate or like make economic changes.
I just want to see if anybody here, Joachim, or I don't know who else might know. I'm looking for the glossarizer link So,
can we hear from somebody else who hasn't spoken before? See a lot of faces that I haven't heard say anything. Anyone else want to come?
Hi, Ollie. It's Nick here. Can you hear me? Hi. Just to say, I had the pleasure of being in the group with Joachim and Christina. So. On my own, so I had their full attention. They didn't quiz me on the presentation, luckily, but I just said that I liked everything I saw there. But my question really was about what the expectations were and the level of ambition, whether we're intending here to create, if you like, a very thick platform, a very rich platform, which we can pull a large number of cooperators onto, sort of build, if you like, the Facebook of cooperatives. Horrible thought, but a terrifying thought. Or the alternative is whether we're going to try to create the thinnest possible, minimum necessary level of protocol. I think the conversation was early on earlier, to enable us to connect where we're doing our things and where, if you like, the balance is between the thick and the thin. So I don't know the answer to that. I've got as you know, Ollie, I've got a thing going about that on the thin side of it being around identity and how you can have portability of cooperator identity between co-ops. So you have confidence on the authentication that the person who's presenting is somebody that's a real person and a cooperator, and maybe verified as a cooperator from somewhere else, and you've got some degree of trust between them, and maybe some portability of credentials between them. So that's it's stuff in that area, and we were saying that that the work well, there is work. There's a lot of thought going on around that at the moment. So so that was us.
I think that's a really good point, Nick.
Hi, Graham.
Hi.
See you again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly. I think that where we're at is that we've got a pretty thin platform at the moment, and I think we want to keep it that way. I would say we want to make it thinner and thinner. Some people are saying, "Oh, I'd like to have some project management tools in there, or I'd like to have, Matrix rather than Mattermost, or this rather than that, or I think, and that's fine. I think we want to have that because everyone's got different requirements and different preferences. So I think that's you've got to go with that. You can't enforce a sort of a corporate style, which is it's just destructive and limiting.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we were saying was, well, if there was one thing, so Christina's just put this in the chat actually. One of the things we might ask is, if you were going to the ICA, if the ICA was, if you look, the god of cooperators globally, if you were going to them to say, if the Pope, if it's the papal, you're going to say, what is it that you would put out as your minimum statement of what you want everybody to do? What would be that thing? What would it be? Would it to say, what is the protocol you want us to follow, that minimum level of thing that you would ask them to try and not necessarily enforce, but if you like, talk about?
So it's a really good question. I just want to clarify for anybody who isn't clear that the ICA is the International Co-operative Alliance.
I thought it's the Ice Cream Association.
Well, similar, yeah. So I'll be careful about what I say because this is a public forum, but the ICA, to my mind, have a huge job to do in uniting all of the co-ops of the world to create the platform and help them facilitate the creation of the platform that we are talking about, and some of the other essential mechanisms in order to help the cooperative economy and community to flourish and really fulfill its purpose, which it could so easily do with a little bit more organization. However, all the attempts that I've made to try and encourage that to happen have fell on deaf ears. And I imagine that other people in this group have made similar efforts too. So here we are in this webinar, having this conversation amongst ourselves. And I don't think we can afford to wait for the ICA to catch up with the rest of the world. I think that we have to step up and make these decisions ourselves. Christina.
I know we're short on time, but Ollie, this has teed you up really well to just say one or two things about murmurations.
Absolutely. So yeah, if we are going to just have a couple of minutes talking about protocols, it is something that I'm extremely keen on. Having run the conference on platform co-ops for the last few years, it's become increasingly clear that we will never manage to get all of the cooperators in the world onto one platform, which begs the question, how do we get them to align and interlink and to see all of the connections that would appear if you could zoom out and see the whole of the cooperative, collaborative, and sustainable social enterprise regenerative economy from a bird's eye view miles away? How do you actually make that clear? And murmurations.network is an attempt to put forward a proposal for a protocol to make that happen. So what Murmurations does is to say, everybody who has an existing project, no matter where it is or what platform it's on, can publish one extra file, a JSON linked data file, so which lists just some very simple terms. For example, the name of your organization, your logo, your URL, and also critically your location and your RSS feed. That information is then pinged into an index, an open index, which then any other organization can use to pull information from and aggregate however they want. So it makes building maps and directories and aggregators a completely different style of work, because you're not dealing with one centralized database, you're dealing with information which is published by the owners of that information on their own sites by themselves, which is obviously the most authoritative source for that information. So moving through the rest of the Open 2020 webinars, we will have one on murmurations, and maybe after the 11th and 12th, we will be able to agree some sort of protocol for sharing similar information. I'm not saying it has to be what murmurations does, and it would be really useful to get input from all of you and your organizations about what any protocol like that should publish. And we're obviously very keen not to invent any new wheels here. So Murmuration builds on the schema.org specifications for an organization. But obviously not everything is an organization. Some things are projects and some things are other random chat groups. And we need to find a way that we can ensure that all of the elements of those types of bodies are included in an open protocol. So we are very much running out of time. Does anybody have any parting thoughts?
Yeah, there's along the murmuration stuff, there's quite a lot of work has been done, again, in the area of identity and organization, which you could sort of borrow and steal. So levels of assurance, and there are a number of groups which are trying to crack the idea of how do you recognize a trustworthy organization, most about companies. So things like companies' house registers and that sort of thing. But a lot of the protocol work, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff there, which could be sort of, borrowed from, in the sense of to maybe help with that the murmuration stuff. But that's really exciting.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah. Share more links, keep sharing more, and hopefully we can, come back together to actually put in some work towards that. Well, you've got.
Yeah, I have a burning question. Yeah. Sorry. Well, go ahead.
It's okay. My name is Wael. I'm a Palestinian living now in Germany, and I'm trying to build a cooperative in Palestine based on the threshing floor economic space which we have for thousands of years, where economy was very decentralized and simple. And I'm struggling in this business model, and I'm looking at different technologies, and things are much very sophisticated, and I wish it is simple as it was as before, where community acted in such kind of social, ecological, economic spaces like the threshing floor. And when Oliver came about, when he spoke about the alliance, that there is an alliance coming together, and how can it be softer or easier that this dynamic is created, so that people like me will have an easier way to build a cooperative. So a measure could be that we agree on an or we identify ourselves with a common brand. So that was my question I raised in the document. If we have like 95% of commons on the principles and ethics we want to achieve, why we as cooperative persons are not thinking about unifying our economic activities with one unified brand? Would that not solve a lot of problems? Thank you.
Yeah, well, just to come back quickly on that, there is a global brand that you can adopt. It doesn't cost anything to adopt that, I don't think. I'll see if I can find the link for it, or if somebody else can.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, I was just going to jump in and mention the co-op mark. So the ICA, the International Co-operative Alliance, as well as being the sort of guardians of the cooperative principles, are also the guardians of the cooperative mark, which are those two sort of slightly interlinked O's in the middle of the C and the P, which if you're a registered co-op, registered with your local apex organization, like Cooperatives UK in the United Kingdom, then yeah, you can use that. And so far that is probably the answer to your question, Wael. I mean, I think that is the one unifying thing. What it feels to me like we need is something that unites us a little bit more physically, and in the terms that Joachim and Graham and Christina have been outlining in these new patterns of work, more than just one sort of brand, if you like. We're rapidly running out of time, and I don't want to run over because I know a lot of people have other commitments. So I'm going to draw us to a close there. I'd just like to say thank you to Christina, who had to jump off already, and Joachim and Graham for presenting. Great to hear about Haifa, and thank you all very much for coming and listening. It's been fantastic. If you can all just give us a quick wave at the camera, we'll take a screen grab and put you up. Thanks a lot. Brilliant to see you all. And we'll be here same time next week with another webinar. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.